The wind howled across the endless plains, carrying with it the cries of wolves and the whispers of forgotten spirits. In the dim glow of the campfire, her eyes lingered on the flames as if they could tell her the answers her heart had been aching for. She had prayed beneath the stars, spoken her grief to the silent earth, and begged the heavens for mercy, but her womb had remained empty. The women of the village often looked at her with pity, some with quiet judgment, others with sorrowful kindness. She was a bride, yes, but barren. And in this old American land, where families were built on bloodlines and children were seen as blessings from the Great Spirit, her arms had never known the weight of a child. It was on such a night, when the lantern light trembled against the leather walls of the lodge, that he spoke the words which would change everything. The Apache warrior, with eyes dark as storm clouds and shoulders carved by the trials of battle, bent toward her. His voice carried not only strength, but also a promise that felt older than the mountains themselves. "I will give you the child you long for," he said, and for a moment the world stood still. The fire crackled. The air thickened. Her heart beat so hard she could scarcely breathe. She wanted to believe him, yet a part of her trembled at the mystery behind those words. He was not a man to make hollow vows. His people believed every word carried weight. Every promise tied a strand of spirit to the one it was spoken for. His life had been one of battles, not just against enemies, but against the harsh land itself. He had hunted in storms, ridden for days without food, and faced men who would gladly take his scalp as a trophy. Yet here he was, kneeling beside her, speaking not of war or vengeance, but of life. The way he looked at her, it was as though she were the only reason the fire burned that night. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling as they touched his skin. His palm was rough with calluses, the mark of a man who had lived through hardship. Yet there was warmth in his touch, a grounding strength that steadied her wavering hope. The lantern between them flickered, casting shadows that made the walls seem alive with figures of ancestors, as if they leaned in to witness the moment. The warrior's words echoed in her mind, both a promise and a mystery. Could he truly give her what no medicine woman, no prayer, no ritual had granted? Her memory carried her back to the day she first became his bride. She had walked into his village with eyes lowered, her heart both proud and fearful. She remembered the chants of the elders, the drum beats that rose like thunder, and the way he had stood tall, silent, as though measuring the weight of fate itself. When he had taken her hand, she felt a bond not built in haste, but etched in the bones of the earth. Yet with every passing moon that yielded no child, she feared she had brought shame to that bond. Still, he never cast her aside. Instead, he carried her sorrow as though it were his own. When the whispers of others reached her ears, when doubt coiled inside her like a cold snake, he would stand by her side, unmoving, his presence a shield. But never until now had he spoken so directly, never promised the very thing she yearned for most. His words were like an arrow shot into the heart of destiny, sure and unshakable. The world outside their lodge was untamed, filled with dangers both seen and unseen. The rivers could turn wild, flooding the plains without warning. The mountains hid secrets, some sacred, some cursed. The settlers who moved deeper into Apache lands brought both trade and bloodshed, their wagons creaking with goods and their rifles ready to fire. Life was always uncertain, survival never guaranteed. Yet here, in this fragile circle of firelight, the greatest battle was not against the world beyond, but within her own heart. She wanted to ask him what he meant. Did he speak of some hidden wisdom, something passed down from warrior to warrior? Did he know of an ancient path, a promise from the spirits that no other had spoken? Or was it simply the strength of his faith that could move mountains, that could break the silence of her barren womb? Her lips parted, yet the words caught in her throat. The warrior's gaze softened. He leaned closer, the scent of smoke and cedar clinging to his skin. His breath brushed against her face, steady and certain, as if he had already seen the life he promised her. "You must trust me," he said, and though his words were few, they carried the weight of every star scattered across the sky. Trust. The words circled through her chest, both a comfort and a burden. She knew trust was not given lightly in these lands. It could mean the difference between survival and ruin. And yet, looking at him, she felt her soul pulled toward that leap of faith. Something inside her stirred, faint but alive. Like the first spark before a flame. Outside, the night stretched endlessly. Coyotes cried in the distance, their voices rising and falling like mournful songs. The fire inside the lodge dimmed, and the lantern cast its last glow before sputtering into shadows. She closed her eyes, and in the darkness, she thought she could hear the faint laughter of children. Though whether it came from her dreams or from the promise he had spoken, she could not tell. The silence grew heavy, filled with questions unspoken. She turned to him again. But in that moment he was already looking beyond her, his eyes fixed on something unseen. His jaw tightened, and for the first time she noticed the flicker of unease beneath his calm strength. The warrior who feared no enemy now seemed to be facing something greater than any blade or bullet. Her heart tightened. Was this promise one that came with a cost? Did the spirits demand a sacrifice for such a gift? She felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing in from the dark, as though the very earth listened to the vow he had spoken. Before she could ask, before she could find her voice, the wind outside shifted. It pressed hard against the lodge walls, making them shudder as if the night itself had heard his words and sought to test them. The fire hissed, sparks flying like angry stars. He gripped her hand tighter, his eyes burning with both resolve and warning. "I will give you the child you long for," he repeated. But this time, his voice carried not just promise, but defiance, as though he were daring the world, the spirits, and fate itself, to deny him. And in that charged silence, she realized his vow was not just a gift, but a battle cry. What he had promised her was no simple blessing. It was a path into the unknown, and already the shadows stirred as though to rise against it. The night held its breath. Her heart pounded. His hand was strong in hers. Yet behind his steady gaze, she saw it now, something hidden, something unspoken, something that could shatter them both. And before she could draw her next breath, she knew this promise would change everything. The lodge was quiet, but inside her chest, the storm would not rest. She lay awake long after his words had faded into the air, her hands still wrapped around his, though his breathing had steadied into sleep. The promise echoed again and again, pulling at her mind like the pull of a river current. She tried to imagine the face of a child, their laughter, their small hand in hers. But the vision blurred each time, leaving only the sound of the wind outside. Somewhere deep in her heart, she feared that fate did not give without asking for something in return. When dawn came, the first light slipped in through the cracks of the hide walls. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and smoke from fires that had burned through the night. She rose quietly, careful not to disturb him. Outside, the village stirred to life. Women gathered around the central fire, their soft voices mingling with the sound of grinding corn. Children darted between the lodges, their laughter sharp against the stillness of the morning. Hunters prepared their horses, their faces painted, their eyes already on the distant horizon where the herds might be found. She watched them with a hollow ache. Their children were everywhere, small faces filled with life, their cries mixing with the steady rhythm of work and survival. She longed to join them, to have a child of her own to guide, to scold, to love. Yet she remained apart, her hands empty, her arms bare. For years, she had endured the sting of it, hiding her tears in the quiet hours of night. Now his promise burned in her chest like a fire she could not put out. The Apache warrior emerged from the lodge. Tall and steady, his dark hair braided, his chest bare against the chill morning air. His presence drew glances wherever he walked. He was a man known not only for his skill in battle, but for the strength of his spirit. He had led raiding parties across the wide plains, had brought back horses from enemy tribes, and had stood unflinching in the face of death. Yet with her, he was different. His strength softened into something she could not explain. When his eyes met hers that morning, she felt both safe and uncertain, as though standing on the edge of a cliff with no ground beneath her feet. They walked together through the village, silent, yet every step felt heavy with unspoken meaning. The elder women watched them, their faces unreadable. Some smiled faintly, others turned away. She wondered if they, too, had heard the promise whispered in the night. If somehow the spirits had carried his words beyond the walls of their lodge. Later, she sat with him by the river that cut through the valley, its waters clear and cold. The sun rose higher, painting the land in shades of gold and red. He was sharpening his knife, the blade glinting in the light. She wanted to speak, to ask him what he meant when he vowed to give her the child she longed for. Yet the words tangled inside her. She feared his answer as much as she craved it. Instead, she listened as he spoke of the land of the herds that were moving farther away, of the strangers with wagons who pressed deeper into their hunting grounds. His voice carried weight, not just in the words but in the way he spoke of balance, of how every action in this land carried a cost. She wondered if his promise was tied to that same balance. The spirits demanded something more than simple love. The days that followed carried a quiet tension. At night, when the fire burned low, she felt his gaze linger on her, as though searching for something beyond her flesh, something hidden in her spirit. When she dreamed, she saw shadows moving at the edge of the firelight, shapes she could not name. Sometimes she heard the faint cry of a child in her sleep. But when she reached out, her hands closed around nothing but air. Each morning, she woke with both hope and dread twisting inside her. The people of the village spoke often of omens. A hawk circling high could mean fortune. A coyote crossing the path could be a warning. One evening, as she carried water back from the river, she saw an eagle rise from the cliffs, its wings wide and strong against the sky. Her heart lifted at the sight, but as she turned, she noticed the warrior watching her. His eyes were sharp, almost wary, as though the eagle's flight carried a meaning only he could understand. He began to spend more time alone, walking beyond the edge of the camp, climbing into the hills where the rocks held secrets older than memory. When he returned, his face was marked with ash, his eyes distant. She asked him once where he had gone, but he only shook his head and said the time was not yet right. The words unsettled her. They spoke of a plan he had not shared, a truth he carried alone. The women of the camp noticed his absences. One whispered to her that he sought guidance from the spirits, that he might be calling upon powers that were not meant to be disturbed. Another warned her that such paths often came with a price no heart could bear. She tried to silence the doubts, to trust in him, as he had asked, yet the fear grew heavier with each passing day. One night, as they sat together, the fire low, she finally found her voice. "You speak of a child as though you already see them," she whispered. "But how can this be, when my womb has given me nothing?" He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he placed his hand over hers, the warmth of his skin grounding her. "There are ways beyond what you see," he said. "The earth holds secrets. The spirits hold power. I have spoken with them, and they have listened." Her breath caught. She wanted to believe him, but the thought of spirits granting life filled her with both wonder and dread. She had heard stories of such bargains, of promises kept by powers unseen, but always there were whispers of sacrifice. Her heart pounded as she asked the question she had feared. "And what do they ask in return?" For the first time, his gaze faltered. He looked toward the fire, the shadows dancing across his face. His silence was answer enough. A chill spread through her chest. She realized then that his promise was no simple vow of love, but something woven into forces far greater than either of them. Still, she could not turn away. The longing for a child burned too deeply. She thought of the empty space beside her at night, of the way her arms ached for something they had never held. She thought of the women who rocked their little ones to sleep, their songs soft and steady, and the way her own voice had never been given that gift. The yearning pressed harder than fear, yet even as she clung to hope, the air in the lodge seemed to grow heavier. At times, she thought she saw flickers of movement at the edge of the fire, shadows that bent in ways no flame should cast. Once, as she drifted near sleep, she heard a low voice whisper her name. Though when she turned, the warrior was silent beside her, his breathing deep. The days stretched into weeks. The tension grew with each sunrise. She found herself caught between love and dread, between the promise he had given and the silence that followed. He spoke less of it, as though waiting, as though guarding some secret until the right moment. But in his eyes she saw it, the same fire that had lit his vow that first night. And then, one morning, she woke to find him gone. His place beside her was cold, his weapons missing. Outside, the village was stirring, but he had vanished into the wild without a word. Fear clutched her heart. She knew, without asking, that he had gone to fulfill the promise, that the time had come for whatever path he had chosen. She stood at the edge of the camp, staring into the wide expanse of the land. The sun rose, casting long shadows across the valley. The wind carried with it the cry of an eagle high above, and in that moment she knew that everything was about to change. Her hands trembled. Her breath came shallow. Somewhere beyond the hills, the man she loved was walking a path she could not see, toward a promise that might bring her the child she longed for, take him from her forever. And, as the first light spread across the earth, she realized that the cost of that promise was still hidden in the shadows. Waiting to be revealed, the day stretched long without his return. She tried to keep busy, grinding corn beside the elder women, weaving hides with her hands steady, even while her mind churned. Every sound beyond the camp made her turn, hoping it was him. But the hunters returned without him, and when she asked if they had seen her warrior, they only shook their heads. A quiet fear rooted deeper inside her, growing heavier with each hour. The women spoke of men who vanished into the wilderness to test their strength, too fast, to pray, to call upon visions. Some came back with wisdom, some with madness, and some never came back at all. That night she sat by the river alone. The moon was full, its silver light trembling across the rippling water. She whispered to it, asking for guidance, asking for protection for the man who had carried her heart so fiercely. The reeds swayed at the water's edge, and for a moment she thought she heard a child's laughter again, soft and fleeting, carried by the wind. Her skin prickled. She pressed her hand to her chest, torn between hope and dread. When he finally returned, it was 3 days later. His body was worn, his face shadowed with exhaustion, but his eyes held a fire that startled her. He said nothing at first, only reached for her hand, and she felt the roughness of his palm mixed with a trembling that betrayed the cost of whatever he had endured. She searched his face for answers, but he only said that the spirits had spoken and that the path had been set. She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his silence warned her to hold her tongue. That night, when they lay beside the fire, he held her close, his body tense as though fighting something unseen. She felt his heart beating fast against her back. Even in sleep, his breath came uneven, as if dreams pursued him into the darkness. The following days grew uneasy. He no longer joined the men in hunting or riding. Instead, he walked the outskirts of the village, his steps measured, his eyes always scanning the horizon. Children who once ran to him now watched from a distance, sensing the weight he carried. The elders spoke to him in hushed tones, and though they offered no words to her, she saw worry etched in the lines of their faces. Meanwhile, whispers spread among the women. Some said he had bargained with forces older than the mountains. Others said he sought to call a spirit child into their world. One woman warned that such a child would not be born of flesh and blood alone, but of shadow and fire, and that no heart could raise it without cost. The words burrowed into her, feeding her fears even as her longing pulled her forward. At night, her dreams grew sharper. She saw a child, dark-haired and fierce-eyed, running through fields of tall grass. She reached out for them, but the earth cracked between them, a deep chasm splitting the land. Across the gap stood her warrior, his face solemn, his hand raised, as if in farewell. She would wake gasping, clutching at the empty space beside her, the dream lingering like smoke. One evening, he brought her to a quiet place beyond the river, where cottonwoods stood tall and their leaves whispered secrets to the wind. There he told her part of what had been hidden. He spoke of visions he had seen, of a child born not just to them, but to the land itself. A child whose spirit was bound to something greater. He said the spirits had demanded a path of fire. Their child would carry both blessing and burden. Her heart trembled at his words. She wanted to believe, but fear coiled tighter in her chest. "And what if the spirits take more than they give?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her then, his eyes filled with both strength and sorrow. "Then I will give myself before I let them take you." The vow struck her harder than any blade. She realized then that the promise he had made was not just about giving her the child she longed for, but about facing forces that could consume them both. His willingness to pay that price filled her with both love and dread. As days passed, the land itself seemed to shift. The nights grew colder, though it was not yet time for winter. The animals moved strangely, deer crossing paths they had not taken before, coyotes howling in chorus at hours when silence usually reigned. Some of the elders muttered of signs of a stirring that came when the balance between spirit and flesh was disturbed. One afternoon, a group of riders arrived from another Apache band. Their faces were stern, their eyes sharp. They spoke with the elders for hours, their voices low but urgent. She could not hear their words, yet she saw the glances they cast toward her warrior, and she felt the tension settle heavier upon the village. Later she learned that these men had spoken of dreams too, visions that warned of a child whose coming could bring either salvation or ruin. The weight of it pressed harder on her heart. She began to wonder if her longing had set in motion something that could not be undone. Yet when she looked at him, she could not turn away. His presence was her anchor. Even when the ground itself seemed to shift beneath them, the conflict deepened not only in the village but in her own soul. She loved him. She longed for the child he promised, but she also feared the price that hovered in the shadows. Each time he left the lodge, she watched as if it might be the last. Each night she prayed to the stars for mercy, for a gift that did not carry such weight. Her fear grew stronger when one of the elder women came to her with a warning. The woman's face was lined with years, her voice steady but grave. She spoke of a story from long ago, of a warrior who sought a child from the spirits. The child was born, yes, but it carried fire in its heart and sorrow in its eyes. The mother loved it fiercely, but the village feared it, and in the end, the cost had been greater than any blessing. "The spirits give," the woman said, "but they never give freely." Those words clung to her. That night, as she lay awake, she wondered if she had been selfish to ask for what nature had denied her. She wondered if love was enough to protect a child born of such power, or if love itself would be tested until it broke. The warrior sensed her unease. He spoke little, but his eyes lingered on her, his silence heavy with things he would not say. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, she heard him murmuring in his sleep, words in a tongue so old even she did not understand them. His body would tense, his breath quicken, as though he wrestled with something unseen. When she touched his shoulder to wake him, he would startle, his eyes wide, then pull her close as if afraid to lose her. The subplots grew around them, threads weaving into the main conflict. The village itself grew restless. Some supported him, believing his vow was guided by strength and vision. Others feared the path he had chosen, whispering that it would bring ruin upon them all. Hunters began to question whether their luck had soured because of him. Children were warned not to stray too close to their lodge. The divide deepened, and she felt the isolation pressing in like walls of stone. One night, as the fire flickered low, she confessed her fear to him. "What if we bring a child into this world only to lose everything else?" she asked, her voice breaking. He held her face in his hands, his gaze burning steady. "Then we will face it together. Whatever comes, we will not turn away." His certainty was like a shield, but behind it she still felt the tremor of fate moving toward them. She knew then that the promise had become more than just their story. It was tied to the land, to the spirits, to a struggle far greater than their own hearts. And though the nights grew longer and the air carried whispers of storms yet to come, she held his hand tighter, even as the shadow of the unknown stretched wider before them. The nights grew darker, as though the sky itself had thickened with secrets. Each evening the firelight seemed weaker, as if shadows crept closer than they once dared. She felt it in her bones, a restless stirring that would not let her sleep. The village no longer hummed with the same calm rhythm. Every sound felt sharper, every whisper heavier. The elders spoke of balance being disturbed, She knew their words pointed to the promise her warrior had made. The men from the neighboring band had not left quietly. They had spoken warnings, their voices hard, their eyes never leaving him. Though their words were not shared openly, she could read the unease they left behind. Children hushed their play when he walked near. Women lowered their eyes when she passed. The air carried judgment, though no one spoke it aloud. Still, she held close to him, because even when the world turned its gaze cold, he was the warmth that kept her steady. But he was changing too. His steps grew heavier, as though each one carried weight no man should bear. His silence deepened, and though he held her at night, she felt distance between them, like a river widening, slowly but surely. She tried to draw him out, asking where his thoughts wandered, but his answers circled back to the same words the spirits had spoken. The path had been chosen, the child would come. Her heart pulled in two directions. Part of her longed to believe, to rest in the certainty of his vow. Yet another part feared the price he would not name. The stories whispered by the elder woman lingered, haunting her. She dreamed often of the child now, their face clearer each time. The eyes were sharp, too sharp, like they had seen more than any child should. Sometimes the dream child laughed, their voice like sunlight. Other times they wept, and the sound split her chest with sorrow. Always, at the edge of the dream, the warrior stood, watching with a gaze that carried both pride and sorrow. One morning, as mist clung to the valley, she found him kneeling alone by the river, his knife planted in the earth before him. His lips moved in prayer, though she could not hear the words. His body trembled, sweat streaking down his face, though the air was cool. She wanted to go to him, to touch his shoulder, to anchor him. But something in the scene held her back, as if she was watching a battle not meant for her eyes. Later that day he told her the time was near. The spirits had given signs, and the world itself shifted in readiness. She asked what signs he spoke of, and he told her of the eagle that circled low, of the coyote that crossed his path at dawn, of the dream where fire rose from the ground and a child's cry broke through the smoke. His eyes burned as he spoke, his voice certain. She tried to match his faith, but fear gnawed at her. The tension in the village deepened. Hunters returned empty-handed, and some blamed it on him. A sickness spread among the horses, leaving several too weak to ride. One man accused him outright of bringing danger to them all. The warrior did not raise his hand in anger, only met the man's words with a steady gaze that silenced him. Yet the seed of division had already been planted that night. As they lay in the quiet of their lodge, she asked him if he feared what was coming. He turned to her, his face shadowed by the flickering firelight. "I fear nothing but losing you," he said. His words should have comforted her, but instead they filled her with a deeper dread. For if he feared nothing else, what limits would he ignore to keep his vow? The days blurred, each one carrying the same heavy air. She felt the weight of waiting press down on her until even breathing seemed a labor. The land itself seemed restless. Winds whipped through the canyons at odd hours, carrying with them sounds that felt like voices. The river swelled after rains that came sudden and harsh, as though the skies themselves were stirred by unseen hands. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, a gathering was called. The elders sat in a circle, the fire in their center burning high. He stood before them, tall and unflinching. She watched from the shadows, her heart racing. He spoke of the vow he had made, of the promise of a child, of the spirits who had answered him. Murmurs rose from the circle, some voices filled with awe, others with fear. One elder warned that the path of spirits was not the path of men, that such promises were dangerous. Another spoke of hope, of the blessing a child could bring, not only to her, but to the entire people. The fire crackled high, sparks bursting into the night. The debate grew louder, voices clashing like steel. She felt caught between them, her body trembling as she clutched her hands together. At last, the eldest among them stood, his voice commanding silence. He said the Spirit's will was not for men to judge, but that every gift came with shadow. If the warrior chose this path, then the village would bear its weight as well. With those words, the circle broke, and she knew there was no turning back. That night, as the fire inside their lodge dimmed, She asked him again what the spirits demanded. He did not answer directly, only held her close, and whispered that love sometimes required sacrifice. She pressed her face into his chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. The silence between them was louder than any storm. The dreams grew worse. One night she dreamed of fire sweeping through the village, of cries and smoke choking the air. In the center of the flames stood a child, untouched, their eyes glowing with both innocence and power. She reached for them, but the warrior held her back, his hand firm, though sorrow filled his face. She woke, gasping, her body damp with sweat, her heart pounding like a drum. He lay beside her, awake, watching her with eyes that told her he too had dreamed the same. As the moon reached its fullest, the tension broke into something sharper. A group of men from the village confronted him at dawn. Their faces were grim, their voices filled with anger. They demanded he stop, that he abandon the path before it was too late. They spoke of omens, of fear, of the dangers that already plagued them. He stood against them, his voice steady, declaring that he would not turn from his vow. She watched, frozen, as the standoff stretched. In their eyes, she saw the threat of violence. In his, she saw unshakable resolve. But no blood was spilled. The men turned away, though their warning lingered heavy in the air. She knew then that the division had deepened beyond repair. Whatever came next, it would tear not just their lives, but the village itself apart. As the days edged toward the promised time, she felt the air thicken. The nights grew restless, the fire hissing as though fighting to stay alive. Her warrior spent long hours alone, kneeling before the fire, his voice rising in chants that made her skin prickle. When she asked him to rest, he only smiled faintly and said the spirits listened closer at night. Her heart beat with both longing and dread. The child she had yearned for all her life felt closer than ever, yet the cost pressed harder with each breath. She wondered if love was enough to hold back the darkness that gathered around them. On the night before the storm that would decide everything, the sky itself seemed to burn. The sunset blazed blood red, the horizon glowing as if fire licked at the edge of the world. The wind whipped through the valley, carrying with it a low sound that could have been the cry of wolves or the wail of something else. She stood outside their lodge, her body trembling, as he placed his hand on her shoulder. "The time has come," he said, his voice low but certain. His eyes burned with a light she had never seen before, a mix of love, defiance, and something more. She turned to face him, her heart breaking under the weight of the unknown. In that moment, the world held its breath. The land was still, the fire dim, the stars hidden behind a sky thick with storm clouds. She clutched his hand, torn between hope and terror, knowing that everything balanced on the edge of what was about to come. And as the first crack of thunder rolled across the valley, she realized the climax of their story was no longer distant. It was here, pressing against them, ready to break. The thunder rolled across the sky, as though the heavens themselves were watching. She clung to his hand, her heart pounding so hard it felt like the storm was inside her chest. The fire at the center of the lodge sputtered, its glow casting restless shadows against the walls. Outside, the wind screamed through the valley, pulling at the hides and rattling the poles as though trying to tear everything apart. Yet inside he stood tall, his shoulders set, his eyes fixed on something far beyond her sight. He spoke words she could not understand, words older than the rivers and mountains. His voice rose against the storm, deep and unshakable, each word striking like the beat of a drum. She felt the ground tremble beneath her, and in that moment she knew the spirits had answered. Her body shook, her breath caught, and when she tried to cry out, her voice failed. The air grew heavy, pressing down as though the weight of the entire sky had fallen upon their lodge. She thought she saw them then, shapes moving in the firelight, forms shifting at the edge of her vision. They were not of flesh, but of smoke and shadow, their faces both strange and familiar. Some seemed to watch her with sorrow, others with cold detachment. Her warrior did not falter. He raised his arms, his voice growing stronger, daring the unseen to listen. His vow, the same one he had spoken to her, now rang into the storm with a force that could not be broken. I will give her the child she longs for, he declared. His words cutting through thunder and wind. The fire roared suddenly, bursting high and wild. She shielded her face, heat licking against her skin, fear clawing at her chest. Then, through the blaze, she heard the cry of a child, at first faint, like an echo from the depths of her dreams. Then louder, real, piercing, filling the air with a sound that split the night in two. Her heart surged with disbelief and wonder. She turned, searching, and there he was, kneeling by the fire, cradling something small in his arms. Tears blurred her sight as he placed the bundle into her hands. She looked down, and there was the child she had longed for, tiny, fragile, yet alive. Dark hair framed a face that already carried strength. Their eyes opened, deep and sharp, gazing up at her as though they had known her forever. Her arms trembled as she held them close, her heart overwhelmed with joy and terror all at once. She whispered a prayer of thanks, her voice shaking. But as the storm raged outside, she saw at the cost. Her warrior swayed where he knelt, his body drained, his breath shallow. The firelight revealed the strain etched into his face, the toll of the promise he had forced upon the world. She called out his name, clutching the child close, but he only smiled faintly, his eyes filled with love and sorrow. He reached out, brushing his fingers across the child's cheek, and whispered, "Now you will never be alone." The storm began to ease, the thunder rolling into the distance, the wind softening into whispers. The fire calmed, its flames steady again. She sat there, cradling the child, while he lowered himself onto the earth, his strength nearly gone. She pressed the baby against her chest and crawled to his side, tears streaming down her face. "Stay with me," she begged, her voice breaking. He looked at her, his eyes steady, even as his body weakened. "I gave you what was promised," he said softly, "and I would give it again." His hand found hers, their fingers locking together, and for a long moment they sat in silence, the child's cries filling the air with new life. By morning, the storm had passed. The sun rose, spilling light across the valley, its warmth chasing away the shadows of the night. The village gathered outside their lodge, their faces filled with awe and fear. When she stepped out, the child in her arms, the people gasped. Some bowed their heads in reverence, others whispered of omens, but none could deny what they saw. She carried proof of the promise, a child born from love, vow. In spirit, her warrior stood beside her, though weaker than before. The people watched him as if he had crossed a line few would dare. Some elders muttered warnings of what such a child might bring, yet others spoke of blessings. The divide in the village did not disappear, but the presence of the child silenced many tongues. They could not deny the miracle. In the days that followed, life began to shift. She learned the weight of motherhood, her arms never empty, her heart never still. The child's laughter filled their lodge, brightening even the heaviest of days. Yet there were nights when the baby's eyes seemed to knowing, their gaze unsettling in its depth. She would rock them gently, singing soft songs to soothe the unease, reminding herself that love was stronger than fear. Her warrior grew quieter, his strength slow to return. Sometimes he would sit by the fire, holding the child close, his eyes distant, as though still speaking with the spirits who had given them this gift. She feared he had given too much, that a part of him had been left behind in that storm. Yet he always smiled when the child reached for him, and his touch remained steady, filled with love. The village watched carefully. Some came to bless the child, to offer gifts of beads and feathers. Others kept their distance, their eyes wary. Rumors spread, stories whispered of what the future might hold. She ignored them as best she could, focusing only on the life she now held. But in quiet moments, when the baby slept and her warrior's breathing was steady beside her, she wondered what destiny had been woven into their lives. Time moved forward, the seasons changing as they always did. The child grew, their laughter echoing through the camp, their small steps chasing after the other children. Yet always there was something different in their gaze, something that marked them as not entirely of this world. She saw it, and though it sometimes stirred fear, her love only deepened. For whatever the spirits had given, this was her child, her blood. Her heart, her warrior's strength never fully returned, but he found peace in his role as father. He taught the child with patience, showing them the ways of the land, the meaning of respect and balance. She saw the bond between them grow, and though sorrow lingered in his eyes at times, joy shone brighter. He had kept his vow, and in doing so, had given her not just the child she longed for, but a life filled with both challenge and blessing. In the quiet of the nights, when the stars stretched endlessly above them, she would think back to that first promise spoken in the dim light of the fire. It had been a vow wrapped in mystery, a path filled with fear. But it had led them here to love, to life, to a family she had once believed impossible. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. The child's future was tied to forces she could not see, and the village would forever watch with both hope and suspicion. But she also knew that love was a force stronger than fear, and as long as they held to each other, they would endure. Years later, when the child grew strong and their laughter carried across the valley, she would remember the storm, the fire, and the promise that had bound them all. She would remember the price paid, the tears shed, and the love that refused to yield. And in those moments, as she watched her warrior beside their child, she understood that every vow, every sacrifice, had been worth it. The land was vast, the future uncertain, but their story had been written into the wind, carried across the plains, whispered through the trees, and though the spirits had played their part, it was love that had given the promise its true power. As the sun set one evening, painting the sky with gold and crimson, she held the child close. Her warrior's arm around her shoulders, she breathed in the stillness, the peace after so many storms, and let her heart rest in the life they had built. Whatever lay ahead, she was no longer empty, no longer alone. The promise had been kept, and with it, she had found her place in the world, and so their story closed, not with silence, but with the sound of a child's laughter carried on the wind, a reminder that, even in the harshest lands, love could carve a path where none seemed possible.